This is Lou Elizondo, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and this is an instant reaction podcast after the hearings that happened today, November 13th, 2024. Just myself on this one, sharing some of my immediate thoughts after the hearings. I'll run through the basics of what happened. I've got some listener thoughts from the Discord chat as well to give you a real flavour in the immediate aftermath of the hearings themselves. But really interesting. There is some interesting stuff. I'll share my overall thoughts at the end though. So we're talking here November 13th, 2024 for those folks in the future. The hearings were held at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. That's about 4:30 p.m. in the UK. Now, the hearing was co-chaired by Representative Nancy Mace and Representative Glenn Grothman. When it started, I was keeping an eye, folks, on the numbers. There was about 26,000 people on YouTube. By the time Nancy Mace started speaking, it was up to over 30,000. And I think looking at it, it held around 33,000, something like that as it went along. So that's pretty good numbers for a Congressional YouTube live stream, I'm pretty sure. Can't remember what last year's was. Be worth checking that one out. Off the bat then, so again, I'm doing this as an instant reaction to give you my thoughts straight after it's happened. I've not digested a lot of it, and maybe some of my opinions will change. But I'll kick some of these about with you just now. Nancy Mace here, she was the kind of star of this hearing, I think, and that seemed to be not only in the Discord chat, but a lot of the chat online as well. Not exclusively, I can't talk for everyone. She was very good. Very, very good. She kicks things off with her opening statement talking about Carl Nell, H.R. McMaster. Those are big, serious figures who recently made headline statements in various different media outlets. I've covered those on the breakdowns and stuff, and we'll go into those in more detail in the breakdown in a couple of days' time once I've got Dan on with me. But she made a lot of, comments. Those are finger on the pulse statements that were being made and up to date. And yeah, that was really good. She had buzzwords in there immediately, like extraterrestrial. You could tell she got this hearing. She understood what this was about. And I don't think, spoiler alert, I can say that for everyone, maybe including some of the witnesses. I don't know if that's been unfair. And some of the other congressmen and women. Basically, she slates the Defence Department and intelligence communities, saying they haven't been transparent, shock horror. And if they've got proof either way of extraterrestrial non-human life, or either way, whether it's here or it's not, then Congress wants to know. Perfect, spot on. That's what this is about. She slates Arrow and the job that it had done. She says she was disturbed it lacks transparency, with even a lack of knowing what Arrow's budget is, which is a great point. And I think we've got to be fair and say this is Arrow under its previous stewardship with Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, not Dr. Kozlowski. I believe is his name, John Kozlowski. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but yeah, I'll fix that for the next episode. So yeah, really, really interesting stuff. And then she mentions that the Immaculate Constellation report, the 12-page report reported on by journalist Michael Schellenberger, who was one of the witnesses, is entered into the Congressional record. That is just went available online. I'll break that down with Dan. That's a far better place to do that, I think. And with some of the guests I've got coming up over the next few days, I'll get to that just at the end of the podcast. But I'll put the link for that report if you want to check it out in the description for the podcast. Definitely worth a read. It's 12 pages, so go and have a little look through. Nancy Mace passes to Representative Robert Garcia, who people may be familiar. He's made some comments on the UAP topic over the last couple of years, was present at the last hearing. Garcia mentions, I've got everyone who spoke and some notes on each. I'm just going to touch on a couple of things for each one, so not fully detailed, again, just to give you a flavour of what happened and whether you might even want to go in and dip in. And they each basically, do you know what, sorry folks, I'll just tell you, because I learn this kind of stuff as I go along. I'm not from the US, as you may know. each of the the congressmen and women get 5 minutes to basically speak to the witnesses. So after some initial opening statements, they basically will pass to the congressmen and women, and they will have 5 minutes to speak to the witnesses. Not each, just literally 5 minutes to get all their questions out. And if they run out of time, they run out of time. So Robert Garcia, he gives a statement. He talks about mentioning the previous hearings, getting the ball rolling, mentions UAP in our airspace and in our oceans. Excuse me. Still getting over a bit of a cold. He says this is about the truth, science, and facts. And that's a great point. We don't need to constantly run to exotic claims when we remember, folks. This, on this podcast and other podcasts like it, and blogs and YouTube shows, and on social media communities, you can speculate as much as you want. It's a safe space to do that because you're not necessarily affecting or afflicting anyone's opinions or thoughts or scaring anyone away from the topic. I could probably sit here and tell you all kind of weird and wonderful opinions on the UFO topic, and it's unlikely, I would hope or think, to scare you away from coming back to listen. But lots of folks paying attention to this particular setting maybe don't need to hear a lot of that just yet. Not that some of those kind of exotic claims don't come up in the hearing, but I think the truth, science, and facts are a really important way to push this topic forward. And that includes pushing through the skepticism and the trolling and the stigma that comes along with it. Robert Garcia mentions wanting additional public hearings and that this topic needs to carry on through this Congress. And I think by that he means the newly elected Congress that's going to be there for the next 4 years after the election. It then goes to Representative Glenn Grothman. He is a co-chair for this hearing. He mentions being wary of the drone swarm that was flying over Langley Air Force Base. Talked about that on the breakdown recently. Asks whether these phenomena are the result of foreign adversaries or something else. We need to take them seriously regardless, and that something else is obviously not human. And he thinks, interesting point, that there's old stuff old enough, documentation that should be released regardless of private information. And I'm thinking, is he talking Roswell there? Everyone's pretty much passed on who was involved directly in that whole event and incident. So he seemed to be very much throw caution to the wind, fuck it, why does it matter? Apologies for the language. But yeah, so that was interesting. And he does come back to that later and actually mentions within his questioning, he feels events of 15 years or older should be released and unclassified. He doesn't feel that information should be kept away. So pretty interesting stuff there. And then it goes to Representative Jared Moskowitz, remembering, folks, we've not got to the witness questioning just yet. We've not even seen them on camera at this point. These are all just opening statements from the congressmen and women. He mentions there's been a void of information over the decades. This has allowed various theories to grow and fester. He mentions really interestingly, and I think this is one of those lines that will come up and you'll see played on socials. Many of us were told not to ask some of you certain questions on certain topics. And he's talking and addressing that to the witnesses. So basically suggesting there was intimidation or scare tactics, or they were warned off even having certain conversations, which adds fuel to the fire in this kind of setting, doesn't it? So at that point, Nancy Mace, it goes back to Nancy, and she enters the 12-page Immaculate Constellation document to Congress. Again, remember, folks, link in the description. She said a line which I know a couple of people maybe didn't like because they said so, but a lot of folks enjoyed her saying, that she was told she would be put on a list and kept under surveillance if she even mentioned the Immaculate Constellation program name. This is something we heard from Michael Schellenberger and others previously, Jeremy Corbell and co, saying that if this was mentioned or talked about or searched or written down, then these people would be surveilled and came after. It's so top secret. And she basically said, and I'll quote, "Come at me, bro." Which I loved. I'm sorry, I like that kind of plain speaking. And I know we don't see a whole lot of that necessarily, generally speaking, across politics, but I like that. I'm sorry. I'm not actually. I just liked it. So Nancy Mace then introduces the witnesses. So the witnesses, remember, folks, we have Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, we had Luis Elizondo, journalist Michael Schellenberger, and Mike Gold, who was the probably least known of the witnesses coming into this. He was a former NASA administrative assistant or assistant administrator. Those might be two very different things. But again, folks, instant reaction and thoughts here. We'll go into this in more detail in a couple of days. They are basically they take their oaths and are sworn in. So I've talked about this before though, and I appreciate in any setting, and I think we're brought up on Hollywood movies, aren't we, where people swear on the Bible or you swear an oath, and I just don't see how people still, or why people still, if the secrecy was called for, or they so wanted to, why they wouldn't or couldn't lie. And I'm not saying just for this situation. It just seems, just because you've placed your hand on a book or said otherwise doesn't mean they might not be telling mistruths, especially when it comes to something that is the most top secret thing on the planet. I'm not saying these people did, but just in general, any witness. So controversial take maybe, but I hope people get my sentiment from that. So Nancy Mace is first up for her 5 minutes to start asking questions. Absolute fire, I think, as the kids would say. She was really, really good. She was asking Tim Gallaudet about specific UAP shapes. He mentions one being a button/saucer that was seen. She asked Lou Elizondo, who's making UAP, really pushes back on his answers as well, which I liked. She was trying to hammer home that she wanted quick, fast answers. No messing about, no long, analogies and going off on one. She gets Lou to say that the US government has programs designed to back engineer craft. So that was good. She asked Schellenberger about Immaculate Constellation, what its mission is, how it was funded. He said it's an unacknowledged special access program to document UAPs. He says his sources are credible. They are current or former government officials, but he won't go any further than that to protect their identities. Something that's asked later on, actually, about those identities. They ask him to go into that in more detail, and he says no, he's not willing to do that because he doesn't want to narrow down too much who they might be, and which I think is fair enough. As frustrating as that can be for some folks, he has a source. He wants to keep them as anonymous as possible. He mentions the key takeaway here, is that the military and intel communities are sitting on a goldmine of UFO data. The information isn't the fuzzy videos we're used to seeing. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of crystal clear UAP videos as part of this sort of program. And Mike Gold gets asked if the NASA study team was briefed on OSAP, the old ATIP OSAP program scenario, and he says they weren't, but he thinks they should have been. The 5 minutes is then up. I wish Nancy Mace had all the time on this. I'll just say that much so far, without going into too much detail, but I wish she had a lot more time, and that seemed to be the sentiment in the Discord chat amongst everyone talking as well. She really, really impressed. If folks were impressed when Senator Gillibrand a couple of years back really pushed folks on the UAP topic when she was having her conversations, Nancy Mace took over that torch today. I thought she was fantastic. Jared Moskowitz, Representative Moskowitz, comes in, and a couple of things he says, why are people judged? Why the misinformation? Why, if this doesn't exist, why is there a problem? Great statement to come out with on that. He's really trying to force home. I think that he believes there's something to this, given what he's saying. Mike Gold mentions he's in the Dan Farah documentary that's coming out. That's the Dan Farah documentary confirmed by Luis Elizondo. Dan Farah is a Hollywood producer, agent, all that kind of stuff. And it seems to be, obviously, a very poorly kept secret now because it's now came out. He's making what is meant to be quite a big UFO documentary with, I imagine, all the talking heads. If Lou Elizondo and Mike Gold and others are going to be in it, very much looking forward to that. I imagine that'll be well into next year before we even see a hint of that. Shout out to James Fox's The Programme, which hopefully will be coming out before Christmas, it's looking like. Moskowitz asked Lou about signing a document that says he won't talk about crash recovery programs, and it's one of those situations where Lou, it's an admission by non-admission to say he can't say if he was read into one of those programs, and Jared Moskowitz does so there's no Fight Club. If you don't talk about Fight Club, then there's a Fight Club not to talk about, basically, is what he's getting at. So admission by non-admission that Lou has been read into crash recovery programs, it's fair to say. Glenn Grothman, he asks, I'm not going to go through every question here, folks, and to be fair, let me be honest here, I think some of the congressmen and women either didn't make the most of their time, or I feel at this point it was a waste of time, some of them speaking. Whether through lack of preparation, lack of really knowing what they were talking about, maybe lack of caring or treating it seriously, I don't know. Not so far, but maybe going forward. He asks Tim Gallaudet. So Glenn Grothman asked Tim Gallaudet why Congress can't have the Tic Tac info. Tim Gallaudet says there was no good reason not to show it. Representative Tim Burchett, long-time UAP UFO ally of the last kind of year or two, he's put his neck on the line with it, and I know some folks maybe don't appreciate Tim and how much he may or may not know on the topic, but I think he's at least trying to get involved and know as much as he can, and that's a hard place to catch up from. So I respect that at least. And he goes at Lou with questions about what David Grush said. I got the feeling Tim was a bit frustrated with some of the answers coming back, and maybe the overall, I don't know, the same with Luna when that comes up as well. I feel they were a bit frustrated with the lack of answers coming back at them. And I know Representative Nancy Mace sent a tweet out during the actual hearing to say she was frustrated at hearing back answers from Lou and others to say couldn't discuss certain things outside of a classified environment. They had to go into a skiff. So they were getting frustrated with that. But hopefully that hammers some stuff home. Representative Clay Higgins from Louisiana at this point comes up, and he asks more questions around the report. I'm going to have to go back and watch this bit, folks, but he seemed really confused as to what he was even meant to be doing there. It felt really awkward. Again, looking at the Discord chat, a lot of the people at this point felt that was a bit of a backward step, having him commenting there. Don't know what happened, but Representative Higgins, I don't think, let's just say, made the most of the 5 minutes he had, and it seemed to just go back a few steps as well. So yeah, a little bit like when you go into school and try and blag you've done the homework but you haven't. Maybe I'm being harsh, I don't know. Share your thoughts on all this as well, folks, once you've watched it, if you even watch it. I'm interested to hear what Dan and some of the guests I've got coming up have to say on that as well. Representative Max Frost, my God, he looked young. Makes me feel old. He asked some good questions. I felt that a bit of youth and energy injected into proceedings and maybe the topic, which can be a good thing. He asks Mike Gold about Bill Nelson's and NASA's part in the conversation. Mike Gold says NASA is intentionally or unintentionally transparent because leaks happen far too often, too easily. I'll need to look at some more online commentary. I think some folks feel Mike Gold was a little disappointing. Maybe he was sticking up for NASA a little bit more than folks thought. But I really liked his statement about NASA needing more funding and more specific instrumentation to study UAP and really genuinely help out in the UFO conversation. We maybe have to get past this idea, folks, that NASA knows everything. NASA is a big organisation. It's a big company with people who come and go at different levels. So NASA don't know everything. I don't doubt there are people there who do. However, to generally get the conversation and NASA more involved, officially, they will need funding and specific tasking to keep the UFO and UAP topic as part of its ongoing mission and study, okay? And I really liked that Mike Gold made the point, if we were studying black holes using the cameras from fighter pilots' cockpits, we wouldn't know much about black holes. As expensive as those cameras may be, folks, that's a great point. You need certain instruments to study certain things, and maybe NASA don't have exactly, generally speaking, what they would need to truly study UFOs and UAP transparently on a bigger scale and really help out. We get to Representative Anna Paulina Luna, who has been a bit of a champion along with Tim Burchett in the UAP caucus and talking on the UAP topic quite a lot. I felt she was frustrated in the hearing, and I don't know if other folks felt that coming across. Again, I'll need to go back and watch it. She asks if any USOs, folks, unidentified submerged objects have outpaced US submarines. Tim Gallaudet says yes, by some way. She pushes Gallaudet about hotspots where UAP and enter and exit the water. Galladay pushes that back towards Lou Elizondo. She asks Lou about craft being piloted by non-human biologics. He agrees they are likely intelligently controlled, as observed by their actions. She asked Lou to speak on these being interdimensional beings. I think Anna Paulina Luna had her own little quick fire round here, and she really tried to hit the big headline questions home. I don't feel she necessarily got the answers that she or we would have maybe wanted back. Lou mentioned on the interdimensional being stuff that he tries to look at things scientifically, and he mentions the speed these craft are operating at are way beyond what we have or can do. He made the point that he was always a nuts and bolts kind of guy, which, yeah, I thought he might have had a little bit more to say on that, but we'll see. Representative Garcia's time for questions. He asks people what they think they are, which I thought was a really nice, to-the-point question. Gallaudet and Lou say non-human higher intelligences, which is fair. Schellenberger says he doesn't know. Mike Gold said he doesn't know but wants to find out. So pretty straightforward question. He also tries to get the witnesses to stress the importance of the UAP Disclosure Act passing, which we know is kind of still in a balance in a way, shape or form as to what may or may not get through in future years as well, trying to get through those presidential review panels, trying to get through protections. Yeah, there's been a lot of disappointments with that, and I think that's something that we'll maybe go into in more detail in a longer form conversation as to that Disclosure Act and where does that stand in our Congress going to still have the bit between their teeth to pick up what we've got today and carry it forward to get real action or real progress? I don't know. Representative Andy Biggs, he comes in with his questions. He asks why the witnesses why they think things are overclassified. Lou Elizondo says he believes it's when the US government first had this whole phenomenon become a reality to them. It was the Cold War. The government didn't want to show its hand as to what it knew, and that makes sense. And this made me think as well, and this is a general discussion point I'll bring up with Dan. You know, if in one of these hearings we're never going to get a witness sit down and say the location of a load of saucers and non-human biologics are 1 Wall Street, Washington, or whatever it might be. Don't know what that's a made-up address, or should be, hopefully, folks. Don't go storming it. But if they did, you wonder what would China do or Russia do? Or are they going to actively try and invade that location? Would they then focus energy, time, spying on that location? Probably. It would make sense they would. So I get why we don't hear that kind of stuff in these settings. It's as much as it's what a lot of people want. Eric Burleson, formerly guest on this podcast, I was asking some questions about, material. He directs these to Lou Elizondo, and I'll get to a little bit of thoughts on each of the witnesses very briefly at the end. But I think Lou was largely taking the questions from folks at this point. He asked about, did ATIP ever try and get any material? Lou said it was blocked. He can't say where this material might be in open discussion. He could talk about that in a skiff. Burleson asks a question here around, in a skiff, could Lou tell him or show him enough that he would be convinced of a kind of non-human presence? A who, what, where, a who, where, what, when, why sort of scenario. And Lou said his focus was nuts and bolts, not biologics. And a little bit of a non-answer. Could the question have been better? Yeah, but I understand what the question was. So a little bit disappointing there, I think. Has there been communication with non-human life form? I was disappointed with this answer to this question. I'll have to go back again and watch it, folks. But Lou Elizondo says non-verbal communication, doesn't necessarily have to be verbal like us talking right now, but just the interactions with some of these craft, with our craft or human craft, would be a form of communication. Is it a deflection? Is it a fair answer? I'd be interested in people's opinions on that. Yeah, I don't know. I just think we hear a lot more about that happening in other ways that I would have at least thought maybe an answer along the lines of that can't be discussed in a public setting would have been more appealing to me. Not if that's not the truth, then fine. But yeah, disappointed with that answer. And if it's the truth, fine. Representative William Timmins comes in. He asks Lou about the frequency of events. I think at this point, people started feeling a lot of the representatives' questions were either going backwards or maybe unnecessary. And I felt if we had had this hearing first and then the following year the hearing with David Grush and Graves and Fravor, it would have been a different story. I think people would have been pretty happy. I just think people maybe wanted more. This wasn't a hearing with revelations on the scale of David Grush, which maybe is a missed opportunity, is how I'm going to take away from. Maybe, yeah, I think just thinking out loud, folks, at the minute, it's maybe a missed opportunity. And I am generally just reading off some basic notes here and thinking out loud. So I hope you're kind of enjoying this kind of rough take. We then go to Representative Lauren Boebert. Awful. Not a great start, talking about flat earth, birds being cameras, drones and stuff. I think I know what she was trying to get at, but good God, it was a stop talking, please. I saw a load of folks in the Discord and online sharing their thoughts on Representative Boebert as a person, and just on her UFO and the way she spoke and how she approached this, swing and a miss. Big swing and a miss for me having her there at all. It seemed like a copy and paste job off of Reddit, where some of the wildest questions were asked, but with no context or really knowing what was being asked. So, yeah, really strange one for me, that. And I saw some folks saying that it was almost like a plant to deliberately obfuscate or whatever, and I think a few people came across that way a little bit, and I don't think that was the case, folks, but Jesus, it just didn't. I hope none of what she said gets clipped and put online, put it that way. Nancy Mace comes in to start to finish off, not quite, but we'll get to that. She asks Lou, can he admit to be being read into any special access programs such as Immaculate Constellation? Lou gives an answer, which again is one of those admissions by non-admission, where he can't say he was because he signed documentation that if he was involved in those sorts of things, he can't talk about it. She asks if certain material was given to a contractor because that contractor has certain expertise. For example, would you give recovered material from underwater to one contractor, but you would give material recovered in the desert from an exploded saucer to another contractor? And I'm paraphrasing. Lou says yes, different contractors have differing expertise. She asks Schellenberger about how we get more whistleblowers to come forward, and he makes the point, if they were going to come forward and speak to him, he is willing to go to prison to protect identities, and these sorts of hearings are really important to help whistleblowers come forward. One I'm really looking forward to discussing longer form. She asks each of them how they define non-human biologics and intelligence. I got the feeling she wanted them to say alien as such. That's we're talking aliens here. Whenever they mention non-human biologics, non-human intelligence, she wants them to say, we're talking aliens. Tim Gallaudet kind of gets at that, saying it's not a stretch to think in the universe there are higher entities and intelligences. I was disappointed with Lou Elizondo's answer because he gives a sort of definition which isn't. He's not answering the question, but I don't feel that's what was being got at. Michael Schellenberger says, I don't know. He's a journalist, so okay. And Mike Gold sort of gets to, these could be AI machines, really advanced robots. Interesting idea, but again, I felt Nancy Mace was disappointed with those questions. We did have one more representative to come in who was kind of late to the party, Representative Andy Ogles. Little bit to finish on, he asks about why certain sites get attention, and Lou talks about how it seems certain sites, particularly those with a heavy research and development or R&D focus, these are the best sites for developing cutting-edge technologies and whatnot. They seem to be under some sort of surveillance. So, now, like I said, folks, that's my instant reaction. I'm going to just say, in terms of the witnesses, right now, and this might change by the weekend when I record longer form and Dan can join me, it might be before then. I thought Tim Gallaudet seemed a little bit out of place. Is that the right way to say it? Because publicly I don't know what he was contributing outside of he received an email once that was then removed from his inbox. He's incredibly qualified and authoritative, but I think in terms of what we maybe wanted or were looking for here, I don't see the point in him being part of that. Michael Schellenberger, I don't think was utilised enough, and maybe that was down to a lack of knowledge around the actual report he had submitted in his articles. I don't know if the congressmen and women had bothered to read them. Well, not all of them. Some of them definitely hadn't. So that again felt like a wasted opportunity. I know some folks were unsure on Schellenberger anyway, just on the basis he was a journalist with second-hand knowledge. There's no first-hand knowledge coming from Schellenberger, potentially third-hand knowledge, depending on sources. But at least his part has got that report into Congress, which is good. Mike Gold, I feel a lost opportunity there. I don't know how much he managed to contribute. I think he would be a welcome name and ally going forward in terms of this conversation. In this hearing, though, not what I was kind of hoping to get from him. And Lou Elizondo, I think it's good he has finally testified. That's finally done. That's something people have wanted now for a long, long time. I'm going to have to go back over some of Lou's answers. I feel what Lou Elizondo can contribute, we know, and most of it's out, including what's in his book and what's been said over the years. But given the things he said he would need to speak to behind closed doors and those skiffs, then I would hope more comes of what happens in the background. Interestingly, for the next 5 days, members of Congress can think of other questions and submit them to the witnesses to follow up with answers. So hopefully we get some more coming back as well. Like I say, folks, instant reaction. Nancy Mace was the star here. She killed this, and I feel a few of the congressmen and women held up their side of the bargain really well. Burleson, Frost, Luna, Burchett. I felt there was some frustration coming through, though, from some of those too. Immediate thoughts ahead of a few days of thinking. My immediate thoughts, a little underwhelming, even for me, with low expectations. If this had been that first hearing and then we got Grush, perhaps a different story. But that's something I'd be really interested to hear over the next couple of days, folks, what you lot think about this hearing, the comments you see online. Some of you will only listen to this podcast. I would encourage you to at least find some clips online as well, and try and go through and watch some of those and share your thoughts. Did all the witnesses stick the landings here? I don't think so either, but that's something I'll need to go into in a bit more detail when Dan joins me. I want to finish off with some thoughts from some folks on the Discord, which I think will give you quite a smorgasbord. Is that even the right phrase? I don't know. Maybe of opinion across the palette here, if you want to call it that. Christ, it's been a long day. So Upside Down Orb said, overall I'm satisfied, but I wish they'd asked about Roswell. Jimmy the Earthling said, Gallaudet could have said Catalina Island when asked about hotspots. We all know he's trying to get a submersible down there. Mace should ask all the questions. Rob said, I'm not sure we learned anything more as a community here. Is it fair to say the lack of detail and or revelations is due to classification? It seems like Lou has more to say but can't in a public forum. Therefore, can we really expect anything more from these public hearings? Maximus said, as a new person to this topic, this is a great first step to normalise the topic. However, I have been texting my family through all of this and none seem interested other than my long-suffering wife. I can feel your pain there, Maximus. I'm sure my wife does. I wonder if US Congress talking about this kind of stuff isn't enough to pique their interest. And if it isn't, what will? I really enjoyed Miss Mace and her questions. You'll see that theme, folks. Mesodude. If anything, I hope it encouraged whistleblowers to come out. Not much new information. For us diehards, wish we had more Roswell discussions. Trevsey said, I don't think we learned much more than we already knew, apart from a button sighting. Sadly, this should be big news in the mainstream media and raising the profile of the topic, but it won't be. Gnosis said, there were some interesting details, but not that great in the middle. However, some of the Congress people's opening statements were fire. I agree, folks. This started really strongly. And if you get through Mace and Garcia, there's not a whole lot other than bits to pick at afterwards. Follow up from that, Maximus again said, now I've watched it and understood the roles each witness had, I thought it was a good spread. One military guy, one intelligence guy, one journalist, one scientist. Covers all the bases. Only concern was a lack of direct witnesses, but if it moves the needle towards protection for the witnesses, I would consider it a win. Really good point, really good way to look at it, and I appreciate Maximus saying he's new to the topic as well. I would think on a next hearing, we need more than what we got today. We need to move on from that. We can't have another hearing that is just a good introduction to the topic. I think we've covered those bases now, so good point. MJ Weber, I want Bigelow and some smoking dog men at the next hearing. That would be decent, I'm not going to lie. Not a Mantis says, I was positively surprised as it brings a continued focus on the topic and the level was proper for that. Gold's presence was, albeit somewhat off in the setting, a nice nod towards using NASA properly. I thoroughly enjoyed the repeated why spend money and keep secrets if nothing is there. And also, Lauren Boebert, and I'm going to paraphrase here, wasn't the best. So yeah, I didn't vet that one right at the end there, so almost snuck one past us. Mark and Patch said, I had to laugh at some of the questions, not a chance they were going to get answered, and they knew that, wasting important time in that setting. Matissimo said, a fairly okay summary of recent stuff for the non-UFO crowd. I don't know if it'll go anywhere though. I think Gold was really trying to keep NASA happy with the honesty bullshit, but snuck in a little bit of tell when he said something about not getting enough of the information. I wish they had summarised it with talking about making sure that the UAP Disclosure Act goes through, more of a focused direction, more of a call to action. Mace was good, and the Babe wasn't too bad at the end there. You'll have to watch when Ogles comes in to get that reference, folks. MC Buchanan, this hearing didn't nudge things forward. Lots of good in there, but crucially very little for the Congress folk to take away and go after. Sneaky McDave said, I feel the same. Grush was a bombshell. This was nowhere near that level. That's a very fair comment. I thought Lou met with Congress folks regularly. Why did they keep asking him stuff he can't answer? Why did it feel totally off the cuff? I think Dave's right. Some of them felt really ill-prepared, and I wonder how much they leave to assistants and staffers to prepare stuff for them. NC Buchanan says, I'm still convinced there's a cover-up, but I don't know what good this hearing served. It felt a bit lightweight. NDNY, I think the Immaculate Constellation stuff hopefully gives Congress a thread to pull on. If they can get access to all these high-quality videos, etc., that could light a serious fire. Mace doesn't like the fact they're being lied to, as government has flat-out denied its existence. Last couple, folks, and I'll finish up. Can't believe I've spoke for this long on my own, so I hope you're still with me. Nocease says, hopefully they take it seriously and have time to reflect and basically submit some extra questions, like I mentioned they can do. Glapworth says, Corbell and all have been pushing this hearing as significantly moving the needle. It hasn't. The revelations of Grush and Fravor at the last hearing were so shocking to the public it made waves. This was a bit of a nothing burger. The questions were sometimes quite pointed, and some were brilliant. The witnesses, though, except for Luis and at one time Schellenberger, were awful, but I suppose it furthers the conversation. I'm sad they never mentioned Roswell, unless I missed it. You didn't. It would have been ace to see Luis going on the record about it. All the skiff talk was frustrating, as Tim Burchett alluded to. I felt Gold was mostly pointless, but not worse than Rear Admiral Tim. So, yeah, fair opinion. Some people may agree, disagree on that one. And I'll finish off again with Gnosis, because I do enjoy his commentary. The Congress people were the star of the show. All opening statements from them and the witness, apart from Gold, who just seemed left field, were good. The question quality was scattergun as usual and shows the lack of deep knowledge on the topic they have. But it wasn't negative in any way, all part of the process. My only worry is Congress doesn't seem to have an action plan to get to the truth. Well, not one they're sharing. Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this. I know I've only done a few of these on my own. But yeah, I just thought I could share my instant thoughts. I thought this might last 10 minutes. It's lasted a lot longer. My plan is over the next kind of 4 to 5 to 6 days, you'll have 3, 4, maybe 5 shows out on UAP hearings fallout. I do have a couple of guests, so I've got a breakdown with Dan on this, of course. I've got George Knapp joining me in the next couple of days to discuss his documentary series and the hearings fallout. I've got journalist Brian Bender joining me on the podcast for the first time, going to discuss his part in the Beyond docu-series, his work on the UFO topic, and of course, the hearings fallout as well. And maybe one of those congressmen or women will join me on the podcast in the next day or so to share their thoughts on how things have gone too. Please send over your questions, thoughts, opinions on this and anything else to the usual email address, ufouapam@gmail.com. If you agree, disagree, or something in between, I'd love to hear from you. But the hearings are done now, folks. Where do we go from here? Who knows? But I shall speak to you very, very soon. That is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify. Just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue.